Darwin's Voyage of Discovery. What was Charles Darwin's contribution to science? Darwin developed a scientific theory of biological evolution that explained how modern organisms evolved over long periods of time through descent from common ancestors. Or did he? Lamarck's theory was published in 1802, is credited with some now debunked ideas, but he is credited with advancing the theory of evolution beyond the observable natural selection. Jean-Baptiste de Lamarck's theory on giraffes states that original short-necked ancestors kept stretching their necks to reach higher and higher until they become a long-necked giraffe, driven by the inner need. Also, Erasmus Darwin wrote his theory in a poem. Organic life beneath the shore's waves was born and nursed in ocean's pearly caves. First forms minute, unseen by spheric glass, move on the mud or pierce the watery mass. These, as successive generations bloom, new powers acquire and larger limbs assume, whence countless groups of vegetation spring and breathing realms of fin, feet, and wing. From the Temple of Nature, Erasmus Darwin, 1801. Charles Darwin was born in England, February 12, 1809. He grew up at a time when scientific view of natural world was shifting dramatically. Geologists were suggesting that the Earth was ancient and had changed over time, and biologists were suggesting that life on Earth had also changed. The process of change over time is called the theory of evolution. Darwin was invited to sail on the HMS Beagle's 5-year voyage mapping the coastline of South America. Darwin planned to collect specimens of plants and animals on the voyage. What 3 patterns of biodiversity did Darwin note? Darwin noticed that different yet ecologically similar animal species inhabited separated but ecologically similar habitats around the globe. Darwin also noticed that the different yet related animal species often occupied different habitats within the local area. Darwin noticed that some fossils of extinct animals were similar to living species. Darwin filled his notebooks with observations about the characteristics and habitats of the different species he saw. Darwin wanted to explain the biological diversity he observed in a scientific way. He looked for larger patterns into which his observations might fit. As he traveled, Darwin noticed 3 distinct patterns of biological diversity. Number 1, species vary globally. Number 2, species vary locally. And number 3, species vary over time. Darwin noticed that different, yet ecologically similar animals species inhabited separate but ecologically similar habitats around the globe. Darwin found flightless, ground-dwelling birds called rheas living in grassland of South America. Rheas look and act a lot like ostriches, yet rheas live only in South America and ostriches live in Africa. When Darwin visited Australia's grassland, he found another large flightless bird, the emu. Darwin also noticed that rabbits and other species living in European grasslands were missing from grasslands of South America and Australia. Australia's grasslands were home to kangaroos and other animals that were found nowhere else. What did these patterns of geographic distribution mean? Other examples of local variations came from the Galapagos Islands. These islands are close to one another, yet they have different ecological conditions. Several islands were home to distinct forms of giant land tortoises. Darwin saw differences among the giant land tortoises that inhabit the islands and learned from the island's governor that the tortoise shells varied in predictable ways from one island to another. The shape of the tortoise shells corresponded to different habitats. Isabella Island has high peaks, is rainy, and has abundant vegetation that is close to the ground. A tortoise from Isabella Island had a dome-shaped shell and short neck. Was there a process of competition that eliminated the other species? Was natural selection to blame for eliminating the species that did not feed enough? Hood Island, in contrast, is flat, dry, and has sparse vegetation. A long neck and a shell that is curved and open around the neck and legs allow the Hood Island tortoise to reach sparse, high vegetation. Darwin also observed that different islands had different varieties of mockingbirds, all of which resembled mockingbirds Darwin had seen in South America. In addition, Darwin noticed several types of small brown birds in the islands with beaks of different shapes. Later, he theorized why they were different. What were the possible reasons? Darwin also collected fossils, which are the preserved remains of traces of ancient organisms. Darwin noticed that some fossils of extinct animals were similar to living species. Were they the same species? The armadillo at half meter, was it the same as the glyptodont at 3 meters? On the voyage home, Darwin thought about the patterns he'd seen. Darwin sent plant and animal species to experts for identification, and the Galapagos mockingbirds turned out to belong to three separate species found nowhere else. The little brown birds were actually all species of finches, also found nowhere else, though they resembled a South African finch species. The same was true of Galapagos tortoises, marine iguanas, and many plants that Darwin had collected on the islands. Darwin spent years actively researching and filling notebooks with ideas about species, turtles, finches, and armadillos. What is the relationship between similar species? With limited evidence, there were theories invented that species were related, or were natural selection of genes and competition the source of differences? What does your evidentiary studies show?